Oh, you gonna get locked out?
No, I was... Oh, man. There's cool background effects in the software, and it doesn't let me add it once we start recording. Anyway, imagine I'm in a snazzy studio, as they call it, for the duration of this.
Is that what they call it?
That is what they're calling it. That is what they call it. That is the name that they assigned to that graphic they put behind in their little built-in. I don't know what's going on. Riverside's an interesting software. Anyway, welcome to the Lord's 87th episode of the Duels of Man Dorks podcast, a D&D and Magic the Gathering podcast. I am one half of the Dungeon Bros, Connor.
I'm Sam.
And I totally fucked that up entirely, but whatever. We're the Dungeon Bros.
Went with it,
It's I'm very sleep deprived at the moment. Can you tell with the bags, with the bloodshot in the eyes? Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. Regardless, we've got news to discuss in the world of the Gathering of Magics, as we are coming off of the MagicCon Chicago weekend, one where both Sam and I were totally not in attendance of at all, because we are what Americans like to say are poor. It's fun. Really enjoy all the
podcast, not anything else.
Exactly. It's our free hobby. We can talk about magic without having to buy magic. That's the benefit of it. But speaking of buying magic, I've been buying some magic in recent days.
Have you?
On Friday, went to the local game store for the Commander Night, which is very fun. She's clawing at everything, so that's fun. The cat she managed to knock over one of the scratchers to put it on the ground so she can like pounce and like kill. Yeah, it's a whole vibe. Anyway, I was at the game store. Of course, the $5 purchase of something within the store to participate. And apparently a bunch of the regulars that like run that whole little Commander Night and like the employees that do that were away at MagicCon. So it was just kind of, it was very informal, shall we say. But yeah, it was fun. I got some singles, got an Innistrad remastered pack. It had nothing of use in it. And I got to play with some strangers. The talk of the town was, of course, the bracket system.
Well, yeah.
Everyone had an opinion. All of them were wrong, including my own, just because it's an opinion, Sure. No, everyone was pretty reasonable. A lot of people were like, yeah, all the decks are like, every deck that we have is going to be like a 3 or a 4, Like, so I was playing my new Alesha, Who Smiles at Death deck. It's a Mardu list, nice little reanimation package. Played against a Golgari like Dredge. It's the thing that like it gets +1/+1 counters when it makes like the fungus that can't block tokens and
the
stuff.
Myco Tyrant.
I think it might have been that. I think it was the Myco Tyrant. And I also played against, it was Hashaton and the Wise Mothman.
There you go. Those are
Hashaton kind of won.
I can imagine, yeah.
Very easily.
He's a very good card. I mean, once you move him out of that other deck and into the build around, he's pretty strong.
So he was joking that he was playing an upgraded precon. What the Wise Mothman player didn't realize until about 3 to 4 turns in, he's like, wait, you're all graveyard decks, aren't you? As we sat there with our 3 rad counters very happily milling over the top of our deck into our graveyards. But no, it was fun. Everyone was very nice. The games were light and fun, and it was lovely, and I hope to do it again in the very near future.
Did you win?
No. Neither of them. We played two games. I basically wasn't able to do anything the first game because it ended very, very quickly. We were playing with another person who had a mono red, like super aggro deck that I don't even remember what they were even doing. They had there was a dragon commander. It was one of the Kamigawa ones that had like 4 red pips, and he artifact ramped so hard on the first 2 turns that he got his commander out super early and was just like dumping his deck onto the battlefield and wiped the floor with us. And he was like, I've never been able to do this with this deck. That's awesome. And we were like, all right, well, game 2, let's go. So that was fun. Chester, ma'am, do you need to claw at the bed right now? This bitch. She's offended that I didn't win the games, I think.
As she should be. As she should be. She expects highly of us.
That's true. That's true. But I didn't just play Magic. We've talked about Magic recently on our most recent episode of Bonus Action. It's a supplement podcast for the Duels of Mana Dorks. You can get on Patreon, and we release the set reviews and basically everything to the free feeds eventually. We got the old Wyatt, the old typical Gemini, and we got to talk about Ether Drift, do a set review of that, go over the mechanics and some of the favorite cards, including Hashaton. In that video, you can check it out. It's the last episode of the podcast. The more I think about it, I think we were a bit too generous. Like,
you think so?
We love an individual card, you know?
We do.
Big fan of an individual card here. On the whole, I feel like the set kind of just doesn't. You know, I don't like it. It's very mid.
I feel like we were all like, oh, it's super mid. I don't think it's the worst set probably ever, but it's pretty mid.
Like, I liked Murders at Karlov Manor more.
Really? And
yeah.
You were very vocally against that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I've softened my view on Murders because of the Yaris face down deck that I have. I've gotten a lot of play with that, and I understand that mechanic more. And maybe it's on me. Maybe I need to play more with some vehicles and mounts and get more comfortable with that whole situation. Love a cycling card though. Very, very big fan of a cycling card. Especially the one that's on the card and not like vroom vrooms. So anyway, I think that's enough dawdling about at this point. You can get the Duels of Mana Dorks podcast on podcast services around the globe: Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, the YouTube video on our YouTube channel, Dungeon Bros, youtube.com/Dungeon Bros, on all the social media. I'm back to making shorts again, so that's fun, kind of. They're very low effort, but I feel like that's the only way I make them right now. So, you know, I just did a video talking about the Jasper mocks that we're getting previewed from Tarkir Dragonstorm at MagicCon. We'll get into all of that a little bit later, but I think the card's more underrated than I would have expected, personally. I mean, it's it's a Mox. It's got an interest. Well, we can get into the logistics of all of that later, but before we do, and before we get into the news, we gotta, of course, recap with the upcoming releases, as we always do. Sam, we have some new release dates.
Yes, we finally have, so, like we said, MagicCon Chicago happened this past weekend, so we finally know things. Fabulous. First up, Tarkir Dragonstorm. That will come out April 11th. Preview season is coming up. That'll be March 18th through the 28th. Like we said, we'll cover a couple cards that we've seen already and some commander decks in our later part of the episode.
Yeah, sure.
After that, we'll have the Final Fantasy Universes Beyond. Again, we have seen cards for that now. That's very exciting. And a little bit controversial, apparently. Anyway, that one will be coming out on June 13th. What?
Apparently, yeah. According to our comment section.
Yeah, Connor made a video about one of the cards in particular, and man, my phone did not stop blowing up.
Right?
Anyway,
my apologies, but like, people need to chill the fuck out. Anyway.
They do. Moving on, the standard set rotation for this year will happen on August 1st with Edge of Eternities. Following that, we'll have the Spider-Man Universes Beyond. Very exciting. So exciting that they refuse to tell us when it's coming.
Who knows? It might come after the next thing, which was announced at MagicCon.
Right? The next thing that was announced in MagicCon, and guess what, Internet? You were correct. You looked at those arenas previews for specialty cards, and you said it's this, and it is, in fact, Avatar, The Last Airbender, Universes Beyond, coming out on November 21st.
Now, eagle-eyed listeners, eagle-eared listeners, eagle-eared listeners of the Duels and Mana Dorks podcast that have been listening would know that we talked about this several episodes ago when the rumors were starting to percolate around, courtesy of the Magic Arena sleuths that exist, and we're like, hey, those cards seem like they're referencing Avatar the Last Airbender. And here we are with them being completely correct, which frankly I'm shocked by.
Right?
I remember, okay, so at the Friday Night Magic, the Commander Night, we were talking about MagicCon, and they were like, I think they announced what the last Universes Beyond set was. And I was like, oh, I remember the rumors a while ago where that it was Avatar the Last Airbender. Nobody knew that they had announced it yet. And I was telling them about how the arena sleuths because they called out the elemental types and then cards with Bender in the name and all that kind of stuff. And then some dude was like on his phone and he pulled it up and he's like, oh, wait, no, that's real now. I was like, oh, sick. Awesome. Fucking nailed it. Anyway, let's move. This happened second chronologically in the timeline of the real world, but I think it's the top story. It's much more important. And that is, of course, MagicCon. The recap of MagicCon Chicago. Not a crazy amount of announcements. Most of it centered around actual gameplay of Magic the Gathering at the convention for those in attendance, which we applaud. Very well done. But we did get some juicy previews for the next set, Tarkir Dragonstorm. Going to include dragons, interestingly enough.
Whoa.
And, in fact, a storm dragon, if you will. The Storm Dragon is the Storm Scale Scion, which is an Anthem effect for dragons, a feature that you don't really need in dragon decks because they're already massive and chunky. But it is a 6-mana 4/4 flyer that gives other dragons +1/+1, and it also has Storm. So you're going to be able to create multiples of these, possibly giving all of your other dragons +3/+3, +4/+4, +12/+12. Who knows? Who knows? Get jiggy with it. But we know what the set is named after, which is pretty cool. We get the returning of various characters: Narset, Shiko, Sarkhan. We get a glimpse at a new cycle of cards, which are the step enchantments, which have 2 modes that you choose when they enter the battlefield. They're 2-color enchantments and 2 of the 3-color wedges that share those 2 colors, with the example that we got the Baron Step Siege, 2 white-black for an enchantment, and you can choose Abzan, which adds green, or Mardu, which adds red, and you can choose which of the 2 effects you would prefer. Hello, Jester. Run the tail directly across the webcam. You useless feline. I adore you. But the card that caused some interesting takes, I'll say. Hello again. Hello. You are just on the move right now. My goodness. The card that caused the most consternation, at least from what I can tell, is the Mox Jasper. It is a new Mox that will be standard legal, in fact. It is a 0-mana legendary artifact. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. Activate only if you control a dragon. So very limited in its scope of being able to activate. It's not going to be nearly as good as something like a Mox Opal, which just requires a certain number of artifacts, much more generic. Dragons require specificity in the deck building to be able to turn on. Sam, we've gotten a lot of various cards here from a total of 9 in early preview season of Tarkir Dragonstorm. What stands out to you? What do you make of the Mox Jasper?
Right now I'm looking at the MTG Goldfish spoiler page, and they are kind enough to list what cards are kind of being listed for at pre-release. In this case, the Mox Jasper is listed for $99.99. Um, it is an interesting card, right? Because of course it is in the Mox cycle, so it's a zero cost card, and then taps add a mana of any color. The restriction of a dragon, when it comes to being in a commander style deck, which of course we are commander first players, it definitely finds homes, right? If you either have a dragon deck just in general, or if your commander is a dragon. What I do find interesting, like you mentioned, it'll be legal in standard, it'll be legal in modern, it'll be legal in other formats. It is a legendary artifact, so which means you can only have one on the battlefield at any time because it will legend rule itself. Um, That being said, I don't know how the deck brewing for this would, obviously we've only seen a few cards, but, this is going to dump possibly several very new, powerful dragons that could maybe shake up the standard format, and this price tag is now maybe not unheard of?
So the short that I made called out a very interesting interaction, and that is the fact that the Universal Automaton, which is legal in modern, is a 1-mana artifact creature changeling. So you play a land. You cast the Universal Automaton. You have an artifact creature. You can then cast... Well, you can do it before if you really want to, but you can cast Mox Jasper. It is turned on, and you can use it as Changeling fulfills the dragon type needed to use the Mox Jasper. You can then cast the Mox Opal, and because you have the Mox Jasper, the Universal Automaton, and the Mox Opal, you then have 2 mana available to you on turn 1. 3 total mana, 2 available to you on turn 1 after this setup for whatever other modern shenanigans you so desire. Especially helpful for a more fringe deck in modern, as Affinity seems to be kind of crawling back a little bit. So will this help it out a little bit? I feel like running Universal Automaton will kind of clog the deck up a little bit with a couple 1/1s that don't really serve any other purpose other than to turn on Mox Jasper and just to add another count to Affinity. But it is an interesting interaction nonetheless that I wanted to point out. And because people gave me shit about the Final Fantasy video that I made, the short, where I was calling out the Cactar card, which we'll get to that after we're done with MagicCon. I said it was standard legal, because it is. And then I showed non-standard legal cards as an interesting combo with it. Oh no. Oh gasp. So I made sure in the short to say, this is standard legal. And yes, I know the cards I'm calling out right now are not going to be standard legal. I'm simply demonstrating an interest, because I feel like I need to do that now for the internet. Anyway, I think I'm pretty excited. I'm a little bit saddened by my girl Narset, Jeskai Waymaster. I have a Narset Enlightened Exile deck, which I have fucking adored since Aftermath came out. This one just kind of seems like very, very build around and not nearly the kind of play style I would want to have. It's like a Jeskai Hellbent deck. It wants you to be Hellbent, or just dumping your entire hand sorry, not Hellbent. Hellbent is you don't keep any cards at all. You're dumping your entire hand into your graveyard and drawing a fresh number of cards. But other than that, I like the Smile at Death enchantment because I just made an Alesha who smiles at death deck, and it's got the Alesha in the art, and it would go slap immediately into that deck if it were printed right now. So, do you have any other cards you want to talk about? There's only 9 here, so not a crazy amount.
They have also announced a couple of commander cards.
That is true.
Being Betor, Ancestor's Voice, or Taval, the Balanced Scale. Taval's the Balanced Scale is the one I kind of looked at and said, oh, that's kind of neat. This is a 1 black, green, blue for a legendary creature, Spirit Dragon, 4/4 with flying. And whenever it attacks, mill 3 cards, then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And whenever 1 or more cards leaves your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. I mentioned this on our recent episode of the bonus action podcast, where the cards leaving your graveyard budding archetype is like one of mine that I'm really constantly interested in brewing. And they're just gonna head and put this right at the face of something, right at the face of a deck. So I'm into it. I'm here for this.
I certainly hope that they don't include too many dredgers. I feel like dredge kind of just amps up the strategy quite a bit. But yeah, that Field of the Dead vibe is very strong, and I like that they're kind of leaning into that more with some newer cards. Moving on, we did get a little bit of information about Edge of Eternities, nothing crazy. We already knew the release date, and then they just showed us some art from various cards without any of the actual card effects or what colors the cards would be. Though we did receive information that we were going to get 2 commander decks. The first one is a Jeskai deck called Counter Intelligence. It's boost artifacts and proliferate counters. So you're going to be in an artifact-based deck. You're going to be having a bunch of counters, proliferation, very exciting stuff. And then World Shaper, which is a Sultai deck, sacrifice lands, grow back stronger. So this is also going to have a lot to do with the graveyard in similar colors. So we got some alien-looking mofos on the covers, or on the boxes of these. A more robot-looking one and a insectoid-looking dude, and it's a little yucky. But we're only going to get 2 commander decks with Edge of Eternities. And you did say commander decks. We are going to get 5 commander decks with Tarkir Dragonstorm for Abzan, Jeskai, Sultai, Mardu, and Temur decks. So yeah, you're much more into the vibe of Edge of Eternities than I am. Was there any art that you really liked that they showed off?
It's so early. I'm always wary of what art they show off. Because they never quite show off the right art, in my opinion. If we just take a step back and look at Aether Drift, we got to see the what do they call it? The first place gold foil, which looks like somebody took urine and pressed it into a card. But nobody was talking about how the Gearhulk's alt art was just absolutely on point. So that's why I'm always a little wary of what art they show off.
Yeah, I agree. I like seeing the actual boxes for the commander decks when they announce them instead of just saying there's going to be 2 commander decks. Just kind of getting a little bit of pre-insight into the kinds of things you should expect out of the set. Artifacts, obviously, proliferation, encounters, land destruction, or sacrifice. So, I don't know. I thankfully, we're probably not going to get previews for Edge of Eternities until Dragonstorm or Tarkir Dragonstorm is like close to releasing. So that'll be nice. And just jump right to the next one again. The preview cycle for these things is crazy. And the last thing of note from MagicCon is, of course, the big one. Avatar the Last Airbender, releasing November 21st, will be the last Universes Beyond of the year. An entire set, standard, legal. It's going to capture the journey of Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Toph as they look to tackle the Fire Nation before Lord Ozai attempts to conquer the world. So they even called out the arena tease. Should not come as much of a surprise. They teased in collaboration with Nickelodeon Animation back in January. So didn't see any cards, didn't really see any art other than already stock art from the show. Obviously we're going to have the 5 colors very easily represented, very literally in a lot of ways. Air probably being white, earth being green, blue for water, fire obviously red, and then all the bad guys are gonna be black. Maybe some of like the ghosts, the spirits of the avatars. I think it's going to be very fun, very nostalgic for a lot of people, and I certainly think it's going to fit the vibe of Magic way more than Spider-Man and Marvel. What do you make of the Last Airbender set?
This is one of those, like you said, the the premise, the theme is going to be on point for Magic the Gathering, which has been a large complaint for a lot of people in the past several years with Universes Beyond. Not only Marvel, but Fallout for Doctor Who, all of these. And this does fit right into magical Fantasyland. I am excited to see what kind of mechanics they create for this set, because they're going to have to create some pretty cool ones, right? And this comes. I do know that they've also announced that there is going to be a new Avatar series that's going to be coming out here in the near future. So this comes at a good time for them. It's
I
like
agree.
they all planned this out all at once,
Isn't that crazy? So I feel like by the time we get to this November 21st release date, we're probably going to have more information about that show. I would suspect, but well, that remains to be seen. What do you make of MagicCon Chicago? I feel like there wasn't really much to talk about, and I think that's kind of a good thing for the MagicCon conventions, because they did, from what I could tell online, Gavin Verhey was going around, he was still doing his random card a day, but instead of hitting a randomizer, he was going out to people and finding interesting people and having them just select a card. Like he found the guy that pulled the 1 of 1 ring, and he got to just pick a card of any card he wanted, and then Gavin got to talk about it. So it was way more focused on the event itself and the people that were there, more than like the news and information to come from it, which I think is it's pretty cool for those in attendance. I was not, so
We've had a large there's been a large pattern of, at these MagicCons, they announce huge swaths of information, sometimes rules changes, sometimes format updates, sometimes new unannounced sets. So the fact that they kind of kept it tight this time, and that, like you said, is a bit of a breath of fresh air. We knew that there was going to be an Universes Beyond to be announced. Finally knowing that is great. Finally knowing that release date, but not Spider-Man, is great.
I would have liked some more Final Fantasy previews. Speaking of
I was surprised a lot more.
Speaking of Final Fantasy previews, the thing that happened before MagicCon that got everyone all up in a tizzy, we got previews for the Final Fantasy Universes Beyond set. That, of course, came before previews of Tarkir Dragonstorm, despite the fact that the set is going to be releasing after Tarkir Dragonstorm. So it started with an article from IGN where we got to see the 4 commander decks that are going to be releasing with the Final Fantasy Universes Beyond set. They're going to be helmed by Cloud ex-Soldier, who's going to be a Naya deck. That's from Final Fantasy VII. Terra from Final Fantasy VI in a Mardu list. Tidus, Yuna's Guardian, is in... What's green, white, blue? Bant. I'm terrible with the wedge names, guys. I apologize. Tidus, Yuna's Guardian, is in the Bant Commander deck from Final Fantasy X, and Ishtola, Knights Blessed, is in the... I'm almost there. White, blue, black. Grixis is red, not blue. All right, hit me. Esper. Damn it. I've wanted to build this one, in fact. Ishtola, Knights Blessed from Final Fantasy XIV, the MMO, in fact. The cat girl that everybody's already simping over with this art is a really good card. I'm just going to say it. 1 white, blue, black, 2/4, legendary cat, warlock, vigilance. At the beginning of each end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, you draw a card. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, Ishtola deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. Incentivizing kind of an Esper Spellslinger in and of itself. Interesting, I think. And definitely leans into the higher mana cost cards, particularly ones with alternative casting costs. I think, of course, the very popular Counterspell suite that you find in CEDH, the free counters, Force of Will being one of them, where you would get this trigger despite not actually paying the mana. Tidus, is kind of a little boring, just kind of moving counters around and not really doing a whole lot, in my opinion. Terra, the Mardu one, milling cards over, and then an effect very, very similar to Alesha, who smiles at death, which is a deck I most recently made, dealing combat damage and then reanimating lower power creatures. And Cloud doing classic equipment, attaching stuff to him, drawing cards for equipped things, making treasures when you have 7 or more power, because he's from Final Fantasy VII. We'll start here with the face commanders for the Final Fantasy Commander decks. What kind of stands out to you? Are you familiar with any of these characters? I believe you should know Cloud. I would be offended if you didn't.
Yes. Yeah, I'm familiar with Cloud. The other 3 characters. I'm not a big Final Fantasy person. I have had to have somebody else explain to me who they were. When it comes down to the Magic the Gathering mechanics, right off the top of my head, Cloud appears to be doing just Naya stuff. Get big. And I find it very interesting that we also had another Naya precon back in the Fallout precons with
also about
Scrappy
equipment.
Survivors. Yep, exactly. As far as Terra and Titus, yeah, they are a little.
I'm gonna save you. It's Titus. It is Titus. I said it incorrectly in the short to piss people off. I called him Titus, and I also said he was from Kingdom Hearts to kind of disrespect it a little bit. But it is Titus. I just want to save you from the comment.
This Bant commander and this Mardu commander are pretty mild. The Mardu one's kind of doing Mardu things. I do like the concept behind this moving counters around, and we're going to have to really see what is in the 99 of this precon, because there are a lot of cool things you can do. I am a little disappointed in the fact that his cheer ability only happens once each turn. Mm-hmm. The Esper commander, like you said, it looks like it's going to be a little, maybe not as beginner player friendly, but it does have a lot of potential there.
I mean, anytime you have access to blue and black, with a card draw ability stapled onto a relatively low mana cost commander, it's going to be something that's going to pique a lot of interest. Especially with white, you have silence effects, you have cheap removal in white. Obviously, it's incentivizing you to cast higher value spells, but this higher mana value spells, I'll say. But this triggers off of any non-creature cast, including things like, for more normal commander decks, like a Phyrexian Arena is going to trigger this. Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe is going to trigger this. Not just like high mana value counter spells, for example. I also want to point out the generally seen as inefficient removal spells. Like, why would you run Murder when you could run what's the other? Doomblade, for example, doing effectively the same thing, but it costs 1 more mana. But Murder is a 3 mana value spell. You get the ping effect if you can get 2 of those things, or if you can cause other forms of life loss through combat damage. Then you get additional card draw. So I think Ishtola is going to be the powerhouse card in and of itself. You bring up Titus, you want to see how the 99 goes. One of the other cards we got previewed was an interesting new card type, Enchantment Creature Saga. So the summons from Final Fantasy is a game mechanic in those video games. The one we have to show is Summon Shiva, 3 blue for a 4/5 creature that is a saga as well. It has 3 counters, or 3 chapter abilities. The first 2 tap down things put stun counters on them, and then the third one draws a card for each tapped creature. Now, despite the fact that the saga is a creature, when it gets that last chapter ability attached to it, it will be sacrificed, just like a normal saga will. But in a deck helmed by Titus, Yuna's Guardian, So Yuna is another character in Final Fantasy X who is called out here. Yuna is the summoner in the party. So her entire gameplay shtick in Final Fantasy X is she is the one that is summoning these kinds of creatures. So I imagine this deck is going to be built around those Enchantment Saga creatures, and then Tidus is going to be able to move those lore counters around to keep those summons around on the battlefield longer, get multiple triggers on their chapter abilities, is what I suspect will be happening. I don't think that's going to be very intuitive for new players, but I think it could create some very interesting play patterns, especially with a brand new card type that we haven't seen before. Terra, I feel like is literally almost the same as Alessia. One less toughness than Alessia. The casting cost is a little bit harder. Red, white, black pips in the casting cost versus 2 in a red. You're paying 2 mana to do the reanimation, and it's off of power 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and that's after combat damage and not attack. There's minutia there, but it is effectively Alessia who smiles at death in 90% of instances. Very cool stuff. We are going to be getting some very interesting reprints in the Final Fantasy set, using old art from the original artists that were making key art for the Final Fantasy games. We have seen Yuffie Kisaragi, who is from Final Fantasy VII, and the original key art from the instruction booklet of Final Fantasy VII as a skin on Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow, because she's a ninja girl. And then Dragon of Mount Gulg is from Final Fantasy I, the very first one. And that one is just a reskin of Ancient Copper Dragon. So we are going to be getting some very expensive cards being reprinted with very unique art associated with them. Before we get into the card that caused people to get very mad at me online, I do want to call out what is often the best value in these Universes Beyond sets, which is the beginner decks, the starter deck sets that you can buy for $20. You get 2 complete decks helmed by unique cards that you can't find in the regular set, where you get Cloud, Planet's Champion, and Sephiroth, Planet's Heir, doing 2 different yet interesting things. Sephiroth. Cloud, of course, still caring about equipment. Equip abilities, you activate the target Cloud, cost 2 less to activate, and during your turn, if he is equipped, he has double strike and indestructible. Sephiroth getting a very juicy ability of an ETB. Creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. So kind of a small creature board wipe on cast for this card. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. Paired that with the vigilance that he has, he's going to be a very big attacker and blocker as well. The starter decks. We've been big fans of the starter decks for a very long time. I really loved the starter decks from Bloomborough had some fantastic cards in them. The starter decks from Lord of the Rings I enjoyed quite a bit. Obviously, we don't know the full deck lists for these. What do you make of the 2 face cards, Sephiroth and Cloud, for the starter deck?
I think these are... The Cloud one is a little more in line with modern Boros equipment design. On your turn, special ability for being equipped, and decrease on the equip there. Sephiroth is a lot more interesting, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, when he comes down, if you're playing, if that person is playing against a tokens deck, you know, it kills a couple of things, and suddenly it's going to be easily a 10-10, a 20-20, 21 if you're in commander. It could be very important, and it has vigilance, so it can swing out and be ready to defend. Makes sense that it's 6 mana. I would be wary to if somebody sat down across me with this Sephiroth.
So this is a bit of a side tangent. I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTuber, the Salubrious Snail or the Trinket Mage. They do like MTG deck analysis and play deck building advice and analysis and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. The Salubrious Snail made a video talking about commander decks where instead of you picking a commander and then building synergy off of that, building a synergistic deck with a commander that offers to plug one of the weaknesses of the deck. Sephiroth would be a very good board wipe commander where all you're doing is I have a board wipe in the command zone and then it sticks around and is this massive beater afterwards. Especially if you're running other cards. I mean, obviously if you have a Maha, it's Feathers Knight on the battlefield when you cast him. I mean, it's going to be a clean sweep of the entire board, but running other like negative Anthem type effects, even if they're temporary for the turn that you cast him, and building just like a Dimir, just kind of attrition beatdown thing, and then using the commander Sephiroth as the board wipe for the commander deck, I think could be an interesting way to play around that. But yeah, I think Sephiroth is much more interesting of a card than just kind of your classic equipment out of Cloud. But we, of course, got regular old preview cards. We got another 10 that we were previewed with various arts. We already talked about the Summon, which is the Enchantment Saga creature, the first of its kind. We are going to be getting some double-sided cards. We had a legendary creature with Garland, Knight of Cornelia. That is from Final Fantasy I, the original villain, where you can pay a massive mana cost once he is on the battlefield, to return him from the graveyard to the battlefield and have him transformed into a big old body. We have a nice enchantment, side quest Catch a Fish, which is a reference to Final Fantasy 15, where they had a lot of fishing, and then you get a land on the backside. A nice little landfall creature that makes itself a little bit bigger with the small little tiny chocobo. And just some other interesting things, including a card that gives itself 10,000 power with the Jumbo Cactar, a 5 green for a 1/7 creature plant with the ability 10,000 Needles. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets plus 9,999 plus 0 until end of turn. My video about this pissed a lot of people off. Calling it jank, calling it bad. Oh, you're talking about it being legal and standard, and then you bring up a bunch of cards that are not standard legal. It's like, yeah, because I'm trying to illustrate a point with cards people recognize very easily. A lot of people don't play standard. A lot of people know what Animate Dead is. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Oh, but you have to attack with it. You can't return it to the grave. You can't return it from the graveyard attacking. It has to attack to get the trigger. Yes, I'm aware. It will have to stick around for a turn cycle or be given haste. Let's pretend in our mind's eye for a moment. We were previewing Tarkir Dragonstorm. And we were shown a 7-mana creature that was a 1/7, and whenever it attacked, it gave itself plus 10 plus 0 until end of turn. There's a lot of people that would say that's a very fucking good card, especially in a limited environment, especially in more beatdown-centric formats like Standard. And yet here we are putting 10,000 power on a creature, which, by the way, you can fling at, which, by the way, you can get end-step triggers or other cards that care about creatures' power to cause effects. It's a very interesting card design. We've seen some cards that have been printed with massive butts, with massive attacking power, but we have never had a card that can give itself 10,000 without any interaction from any other card state. What do you make of the Jumbo Cactar? Do you agree that I was a big old dum-dum in my video?
Well, I agree that you're a big old dum-dum regardless of the video. Overall, the giant cactar, I think this comes down to the internet loving to shit on people and shit on concepts. Oh, yeah. Like you said, it's a very interesting design space, and it does have the potential to win games. However, on its own, it is not very good at winning games. Mm-hmm. That being said, if it's going to be put into a deck, that deck is going to be built to use it to win games. Yeah, it's not a card that you're going to want to put in every deck, which I think is sometimes what people want to say are good cards. Rhystic Study is a good card because anytime you have blue, the deck would benefit from a Rhystic Study. Not every green deck necessarily can benefit from having a Jumbo Cactar. That being said, it's still a fucking cool card.
I completely
Like,
agree.
yeah.
The Cactar is a classic enemy in Final Fantasy, and the move 10,000 Needles is a classic move in Final Fantasy, and the damage cap of 9,999 is a classic Final Fantasy thing. It's dripping with Final Fantasy. I love it. Are there any of these 10 cards that you want to call out? You talk about cards that just kind of go in any deck of a certain kind. Saz's Chocobo from Final Fantasy 13, the 1 green mana for a 0/1 bird with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Kind of an easy include on any landfall deck.
Oh yeah. I think that you mentioned it briefly, but if this is going to be a mechanic overall for the set, the side quest, I'd be very interested. I do love a card that enters as maybe an enchantment or an artifact, and then as you complete whatever task, whatever side quest is on it, then it flips into a land. In this case, it's not a very powerful land. It is just an uncommon card. But yeah, the other side taps for a white, and you can pay 3 and sacrifice an artifact to put a +1 counter on each creature you control. Yeah, I'm really interested in cards like that. I'll be interested to see if they do more of these side quests cards throughout. The other one I want to look at real quick is Stiltskin, Moogle Merchant. First off, that means we're getting creature type Moogle.
Which is
however,
amazing.
this guy is a... Right? This guy is a 1 white mana for a 2/1 Moogle with lifelink, and you can pay 2 and tap him to give target opponent control of a permanent you control, and target opponent gains control of another target permanent you control. If they do, you draw a card. We've seen this kind of mechanic in other decks past. There's a Jund one that's very famous with the Beamtown Bullies. There's a Dimir one with John Irenicus, file something. But both those are very mean decks. This is in mono white, so I would be very curious to see if we get any sort of support around this little guy right here, in this sort of give opponents your stuff in order to draw cards. You know, that's a very interesting design space that I would love to see more of.
I agree. I don't know if it's going to be a commander very much. I think it's going to fit into a lot of those decks that are trying to give away the bad permanents. And then you just get to draw a card off of the 2 mana investment to give them that. But I mean, I think I certainly agree with the design space aspect of it. I want to talk about all of them, frankly, but we don't have that kind of time. I'll talk about the 2 black cards. All right, Cecil Dark Knight is another double-sided card. Cecil, of course, from Final Fantasy IV, is a character that goes through a very interesting character development throughout the course of that game. 1 mana for a 2/3 with Death Touch. I'll repeat, 1 black mana for a 2/3 legendary human knight with Death Touch. That's pretty good rate. That said, whenever he deals damage, you lose that much life. Then if your life total is less than or equal to half of your starting life total, you get to flip him. And then he gets the character arc in the game, becoming Cecil, Redeemed Paladin, where he is then a 4/4 life-linking human knight, and whenever he attacks, other attacking creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. An interesting little Orzhov card that you're able to get down for a single measly mana for a 2/3 body immediately with Death Touch. I feel like regardless of the life loss, this is just going to be a very good card. 1 mana for a 2/3 Death Toucher that can eventually flip into a 4/4 lifelinker that protects your entire board of attackers is going to encourage a very, very aggressive strategy. I don't think it's necessarily a commander card by any means. Maybe in the 99 of some aggressive white and black decks. But in other formats, because of course this is going to be legal in standard and every format, a 1 mana 2/3 Death Toucher can go a very long way, especially when it can become a 4/4 lifelinker that protects your board and enables the flipping of itself. So you don't need any extra outside help to be getting that either. I love the design of that card, both thematically for the arc of the story, but also the actual, you're getting an overpowered 1 mana creature, and then it's going to flip to something, but it does come with a downside, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The only other card that I really want to talk about is the Tonberry, another 1 mana creature, 1 black mana for a 2/1. It enters tapped with a stun counter on it, and then during your turn, this creature has first strike and death touch, a salamander horror, also very thematic for the enemy in the games. It's a very slow moving creature, but if it gets you with that kitchen knife, it's going to hit you for 9,999 almost every single time. Kill you outright, which first strike death touch, it's a very powerful keyword combination that they're reluctant to print on a card, and uncommon nonetheless. So I'm excited about Final Fantasy, probably more than any other set this year, and that's saying something, because we're getting Tarkir, we're getting Avatar, we're getting Spider-Man,
We are.
and we just got race cars too. Do you have any final thoughts about the Final Fantasy Universes Beyond?
Well, it's fitting that Final Fantasy is followed by Edge of Eternities, because we'll have to leave the fantasy. This will be the last one before we move into sci-fi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Never going to have any other fantasy properties ever again. It's the last one. 16 times.
Nope.
It was the last one.
Not allowed.
We're up to Final Fantasy 16, and one of them had a sequel. It was 10-2, which is in and of itself hilarious to say Final Fantasy 10-2. But I digress. Anyway, that's really all the news we have this week for the Duels and Mana Dorks podcast, a Magic the Gathering news podcast. We post every other week on the Apple, on the YouTube, on the Spotify, on the YouTube Music, on podcast services round the globe. We, of course, are on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonbros, where you can get early ad-free access to the podcast. You can submit questions for the podcast for free. You can join for free to ask questions. It's totally free. And if you support us at the $15 and up tier, you can get your name read at the end of the show.
What's new, Scooby-Doo? Coming after you. What's new, Scooby-Doo? Na-na-na-na-na.
Well, isn't that embarrassing?
That must be really
That must be
embarrassing
very
for you.
embarrassing for me. I don't have a way to blame the cat for this, because she's been very cutely curled up over there for a little while. But I'm going to find a way to blame her for this. Very offended. Very, very offended, in fact. So I'm interested to see what your little shenanigans that were happening again were going on there whilst I was gone. But that's fun. Of course, I was about to shout out Brandon Vole, our $15 and up patron, who, when you support us at $15 a month, you can get your name read at the end of the show. And we're going to be playing Commander with him this weekend, maybe with Wyatt. It depends on if Wyatt's available, but we'll be playing Commander with him this weekend. So if you support us at that tier, play some Commander. It'd be a good time. You might even convince us to do a little pre-release. Cool. Mayhaps. Who knows? I don't. No one's asked. I have no way. There's no way of knowing, in fact. But anyway, Sam, do you have anything else you would like to say to the fine folks at home? A little bit of a shorter episode, not a ton of news, but some juicy bits nonetheless.
Yes. I will say that, If somebody's excited about a giant cactar, a jumbo one even, don't shit on their parade, you know?
Like, don't.
You can always find a home for
The
a
the
farm.
classic fear that everybody has of being shat on while in a parade, you know. You gotta be really careful going under the underpass, you know. Someone's just hanging over the edge, just dropping depth charges on you,
Dropping the deuce.
just kerplunking. It's a dangerous world out there in these trying times in 2025. Be safe. We love you very much, and as always,